And welcome along to another episode of TommoTalks, the topical conversation podcast. This series, TommoTalks Music. I'm your host, Tommo, and today I'm more than ecstatic to welcome along a gentleman by the name of Graham Clark from the band Brilleaux. Brilleaux hails from Tauranga, Aotearoa, New Zealand. Brilleaux is a high-energy British-style R&B band, the style similar to like Dr. Feelgood, Wilco Johnson, and 9 Below Zero. Also in a similar vein to the early exponents of the British R&B genres and bands similar to the Yardbirds, early Rolling Stones, Johnny Kidd and the Pirates. In their 22 years of being a band, they've released 9 albums. They've toured the UK 4 times, as well as Europe and Samoa. Along this journey, they've met some of their musical heroes. They've got to jam with them and have actually toured with them back in New Zealand, which we'll hear about very, very soon. Graham is a decorated musician. He's a great guitarist. He's a frontman and vocalist for Brilleaux and absolutely slays the harmonica. And also outside of music, he's a bit of a creative genius as well. So he's written a couple of books. He has a solid eye for art. And this is the guy that sees an old bank and thinks, this will make a good home. Buys the bank and turns it into home, and it's absolutely astonishing. It's absolutely fantastic. So I'm super stoked to welcome along Graham to the show. Graham, how's it going, man?
G'day, Tommo. Yeah, fantastic.
Brilliant. It's been a while, yeah?
Yes, well, I haven't seen you for many years.
Would be 17 or 18, I'd imagine.
Yep, yeah, it'll be something like that, yeah.
We're getting a bit long in the tooth, mate.
Where did that go, mate?
Yeah. So listen, I just sort of gave a quick snapshot of Brilleaux. Maybe you just sort of want to dive in a little bit sort of deeper and how about you guys came about, etc., and to where you are now.
Previous to Brilleaux, I'd had a number of covers bands, and then I discovered a guitar player in town who played a guitar style completely different to anybody else I'd ever heard. His name was Doug Bygrave, and he played in the style of Jimmy Vaughan, Stevie Ray's brother.
Yeah, Stevie's brother.
And so in New Zealand, if anybody played blues, they played Stevie Ray Vaughan or Jimi Hendrix or Eric Clapton. That was the kind of blues that we would get here. But to hear this Jimmy Vaughan style just blew me away. It was just so different. So I formed a band with this guy, and we were quite successful around the place because we had no competition.
Right.
Nobody was playing like that. So anyway, eventually the band finished, and I wanted to start a new band, but I couldn't find another guitar player as unique as Doug. So to play that same kind of music. So I decided to start a band called Brilleaux, playing British rhythm and blues, which was another kind of music genre that was not popular in New Zealand at the time.
Right.
And the sort of guitar players who could mold and fit that style were probably a lot easier to come by. And so I started playing this British rhythm and blues. We were the only band, and we still are the only band in New Zealand playing that style of music.
And what makes it different, say, to the traditional blues that you hear from, say, Chicago or Texas for that matter? What makes the British R&B a little bit different?
I think it was Junior Wells. He explained it the best. He said, back in the early 1960s, late 1950s, early 60s, when the British first started to get access to that American blues, Junior Wells said, man, these English guys, they want to play the blues so bad. And they do. Meaning they play it so bad.
Yeah.
But what he didn't really get was that in playing traditional American blues so badly, they created a new genre of music.
Their own sound.
their own sound, which was based upon Chicago and Texas style American blues. But because they weren't from Texas or Chicago, or and they had a different set of hardships. They didn't feel the blues like those Black Americans did.
Yeah.
They had their own take on it. And that is the style of music that instigated the British invasion.
So basically, the inability to sound like the Texas artists or Chicago artists, the inability to sound like them, created their own style.
Exactly.
You know, that's really interesting. John Mayer, he was a huge fan of Stevie Ray Vaughan. And he said when he got one of the Texas Flood albums, I think it was Couldn't Stand the Weather, that changed everything when he was 13. And he said, you know, like, he just wanted to be Stevie Ray, and he's actually said this in an article. He said that his inability to sound like Stevie Ray gave him his own sound. So that's really interesting how that sort of happened. And,
there you go.
Yeah. So for listeners there, that you might have sort of picked up a bit of a British accent with Graham, and this is really interesting that you mentioned the 60s. Graham actually immigrated out to New Zealand late 60s. So do you want us to take us back? Let's go back further, though, before you immigrated. Do you remember, can you sort of go back to when you first sort of heard music that made you sort of go, hey man, this is me, or wanted to pick up an instrument or wanted to start? Do you remember that?
I do. I used to spend a lot of time at my grandparents' house. My mum and dad would drop me off at their house every weekend. And my dad had a younger sister, quite a lot younger. And so this was in the early 1960s. So she was growing up right in the midst of that British beat boom of, and she lived in the same town, same city that the Rolling Stones came from.
Oh, yeah.
And Eric Clapton lived there. Some of the Beatles lived there. And so they were constantly playing around this Surrey in the southern counties of England. Yeah. And my auntie used to go along and see all these bands in their formative years.
Right.
And she had a huge record collection of all the coolest music. You know, Billy Fury, Johnny Kidd and the Pirates, the Rolling Stones, the Beatles, Elvis, all of that stuff. Yeah. Georgie Fame. And she used to go and see them all. And so because I was only a kid, she used to threaten me under pain of death if I touched her record collection. So, of course, the second that she went out would come her records and her record player, and I'd have them scattered all over the floor. Yeah. And I'd sit and play and play and play all her records. And that's where I first got my introduction to music and what really turned me on to it.
Do you remember what age you were?
8 years old.
Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah, 7, 8, 9.
And like that sort of, at that time, did you sort of realize, or did you know that you were going to progress to playing an instrument, or was it just?
Oh, no.
Right.
No, it's just, I just loved the music. There was something in it that I just couldn't resist.
Right.
It was, like bees to honey, you know?
Right.
I couldn't resist it.
So this was about mid-60s, right?
Yeah, early 60s, mid-60s.
So just tell us a little bit about...
I was severely punished for playing her records.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah. She used to lock me in the cupboard under the stairs. And it was a tiny little space and pitch black. Couldn't get out. She'd get me and throw me in this cupboard under the stairs, and I'd be screaming and yelling.
Mate, I've seen horror movies like this.
Yeah, yeah. She was the coolest auntie in the world, man.
Is that right?
Yeah, yeah.
Apart from the abuse.
Oh, I got over that.
Yeah.
I got to play her records.
Yeah, for sure. Now, like, just sort of talk us through a little bit. Like, I was born in '75. You know, I wasn't around in the '60s, but London must have been, and the UK must have been such a different place to now. I moved to the UK in 2003, and the changes I've seen since I left there in 2010 has been, you know, it's like astronomical. So, growing up as a kid, it must have been a lot, you know, freer. Did it feel a lot sort of safer growing up there?
Well, to tell the truth, I don't remember a lot about living in the UK. When I was 10 years old, 9 to 10, I spent a year in hospital.
Okay.
12 months I was in there. So I didn't actually get to see a lot, you know, of the UK. And then by the time I was 11, we emigrated to New Zealand.
Right.
So this was 1969. And this was back in the days where they were importing a lot of British immigrants to Australia and New Zealand.
That was the £10 pom, right?
The £10 pom, yeah.
Yeah.
And the English were renowned for moaning and complaining about everything.
Whinging poms, right?
Yeah, whinging poms, yeah. They didn't like the food, and the weather was too hot, and couldn't get Coronation Street on the TV, and the chocolate was different. Yeah, just whatever. Yeah. They were always moaning. And so some Australian comedian came up with this thing about punch a pom a day.
Oh, yeah.
And so, of course, I arrived in New Zealand right in the middle of that. And as a young English boy going to school every day, all the kids thought it was a great idea to punch a pom a day. So I'd come home, my arms would be black and blue.
Oh, shoot.
Being thumped.
Yeah.
Thumped all day, yeah.
Was there like any other immigrants in your school, in your class or anything? Any other Brits that you could hang out with then?
There was one came along a little bit later.
Right.
And we would hang out in the playground together and play soccer. And nobody played soccer in New Zealand.
Of course not, mate. Come on
1969, 70, yeah.
Rugby, bro, come on.
Yeah, I didn't even know what rugby was.
Oh, my Lord.
Back in those days. No, never even seen a rugby ball.
Right.
So me and this boy, Stephen Turner is his name, and we would go down onto the field with a soccer ball, and we were both really good soccer players, and we would dribble around and keeping the ball away from all these kids who would try to get it off us.
Right.
And then when we couldn't run anymore, I'd chip it over the crowd over to him, and he'd carry on, and he'd dribble around for about another 10 minutes and while the kids tried to get the ball off him. Yeah.
Now
we were quite unique. And,
I'm sure you would have been.
Yeah, that's why I still have an English accent now. Is that I fought pretty hard to keep my English accent.
Right.
Because despite getting thumped every day, all the girls used to like it. So I was quite popular with the girls.
Yeah.
And so it was in my best interest to keep my English accent. They thought it was cute.
Well, I can relate, mate. In North America, it's a little bit the same, right? So sometimes I'm like, "G'day, mate. How are you?" You know what I mean? You got to lay it on thick sometimes, you know. Now, what was it like just before you left the UK in '69? I mean, the world wasn't as small as it is now with technology, obviously. So your dad comes home one day and goes, "We're off to New Zealand." What did you know about New Zealand? Did you know anything about it? Like, it's like now you can jump on Google and look at photos. You can actually Google Street Maps. You can look at the place where you're moving to.
Yeah. No, absolutely zero idea.
Mm-hmm.
I was told that the kids used to ride to school on a horse.
They do some places, mate.
Yeah, well, they do, and I never saw anybody run to school on a horse when we arrived. But a couple of days afterwards, a couple of these young ladies came round to my house on a horse. And I recall distinctly my dad picking me up and putting me on the back of this horse behind one of these girls, and she trotted off down the road.
Right.
And, of course, the first thing I did was throw my arms around her.
Yeah.
I thought, oh, this is pretty cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's funny, mate. Like when I moved to the UK in again 2003, even though the world's so small now, there's some people that just don't get it. Like I was up in Northern England for work or whatever, and I met these people, and they hadn't come across many Antipodeans, whether that's South Africans, New Zealanders, or Australians, which is a surprise because we're bloody everywhere over there. And this one guy had heard, and he thought that we rode kangaroos to school. And I'm like, time out, bro. First of all, we don't have kangaroos, man. That's Australia. So you sort of thing. And but yeah, like, and then people ask me questions like, do you get Fanta? Do you get Coca-Cola? And I'm like, oh yeah, I think we did once. Like it was a Tuesday. Like
Yeah.
it's weird. So then you're in New Zealand. It must have been a bit of a culture shock, yeah? Like when you first got there, trying to sort of fit in. I think, I've lived in 4 different countries now, and even though we speak the same language in the English language countries that I've lived in, culturally, in some aspects, I might as well be from China. Do you know what I mean? It's like very, very different, and just trying to find out how things work, whether it be IRD or tax numbers or social insurance, things of that nature. So it's hard to sort of adapt and get used to it. It takes a while. So was there a time where, like, your mum and dad said, we were going to return to the mother country?
Well, there was actually. They returned to England after about 10 years living in New Zealand. And the reason for that was that at the time I was doing my apprenticeship, and I said that as soon as I finish my apprenticeship, I'm going to go to England for on my OE, just because of all the cool music that was,
right.
All the bands and stuff. And I was following bands at that stage. And so that was the late 70s when bands like T-Rex and Slade and Led Zepp and stuff like that. And I just wanted to go and see some of those bands. So my grandmother had a few heart attacks. And Mum and Dad said, well, look, we're going to go back to England. And if you're going to come when you come back when you've finished your apprenticeship, well, then that's cool. We'll go now. So they went back to the UK.
Right.
And took my younger brother and carried on their life as they had before. I finished my apprenticeship, and the day after left my job as a printing apprentice,
right.
and went to the UK and started my OE. I saw, I took the opportunity to see dozens of, top bands at the time. And I saw some great acts.
I'm sure.
Thin Lizzy and Patti Smith.
Right.
Pink Floyd and just 10cc, heaps of others too. But
awesome.
Yeah. But I still wasn't playing music at that stage. I was just a music lover. I loved music.
Right.
And after living in the UK, or my OE, for 4 years, I came back to live in New Zealand.
Okay. And what year was that when you got back to New Zealand?
About 81, 82.
Ah, the really good dress era for New Zealanders, right?
Yeah. Yes, rather embarrassing, but yeah.
So when you get back to New Zealand, you've obviously still got the love of music, etc. Was it there shortly thereafter you sort of got inspired to pick up an instrument? How did all that happen?
Well, it was. The first thing I did when I came back here was to get a job. So I got a job, and my new workmate said to me, right, I'm going to the pub on Friday. I'm going to see a band. I said, "Oh, wow. Yeah, man, I'd love to come." I've never seen a band in a pub before
Right.
because when I left New Zealand, I was sort
Too
of
young.
18, too young to go to the pub. And in England, I just went to see all the big bands. So I got back here and got to see my first band in a pub. And it was in Tauranga. I walked in there. It was back in the days, you could still smoke in the bars.
Yeah, the good old days.
You couldn't see across the room. It was such a cloud of smoke. Your feet were sticking to the carpet, and it was shoulder to shoulder. It was just sardine packed in this bar. And up on the stage was this local band. And I was just mesmerized. The singer, I just couldn't take my eyes off this band. And I recall saying to myself, man, I want to do that.
Right.
Now, I'd never sung a note in my life before, maybe sung along with records in the lounge, but I'd never sung, never played an instrument. But I decided I wanted to do that. Well, my mate said, "Oh, well, I've got a drum kit." And he said, "I've got a mate who's got a bass guitar. Let's have a jam."
Right.
Well, I didn't know what a jam was. But
something you put on your scones, mate. Right.
Yeah, mate. I was up for anything. Yeah. So we had a jam, and they said, "Man, you can sing real good."
Right.
So I thought, "Oh, cool. Okay." I think the first song I ever sang was Jumping Jack Flash.
Right. And that was the start of your nearly 35 years in music. Yeah. Excellent. Yeah. And then you sort of just played in local cover bands? Did you do original music back then? What was your sort of...
No. Well, because I had no idea of my ability, we decided we were going to form a band, but I didn't want to play in the pub because I didn't know if I was good enough. And I had a terrible fear of failure.
Right.
Or being made to look stupid. So we decided that we would form a cabaret band and learn a whole bunch of cabaret songs so that we could teach ourselves the ropes, how to plug in a PA, and the crowd wouldn't be too discerning. You know, they weren't there for the band, they were there for the food kind of thing.
Yeah.
And at the same time, I saw an advert in a local newspaper by the local Chinese restaurant, which was a new thing in town at the time, asking for a house band. So I applied to this, the New Orient Chinese restaurant, it was called, at 11th Avenue,
right,
Tauranga. And they wanted to know what our experience was. And I said, "Oh, you know, we've been playing for years and stuff like that. We'd never played to an audience before."
Right.
So they gave us the job. They didn't audition us or anything. They just gave us the job. We went back, got a whole repertoire of cabaret stuff, and went to work at the Chinese restaurant as the house band.
Is that right?
Yeah. And we did a really good job, actually. The only hiccup along the way was that our drummer, we discovered that our drummer couldn't play a waltz beat.
Okay.
He was a rock drummer, and he sort of managed to scramble through a cabaret set, but he could not physically play a waltz.
Right.
So we had to get rid of him and find a new drummer. And we found a new drummer. He was a 14-year-old schoolboy.
All right.
And that 14-year-old schoolboy is still my drummer today.
That's Bino.
He's the drummer in Brilleaux, yeah.
Really incredible. Not only is he a good drummer, he's a bloody good guy too, isn't he?
Oh, he's magic. He's a top drummer, man.
Yeah.
Well,
yes, solid.
You wouldn't put up with a shit drummer for 40-odd years or whatever.
No, you're right.
It's not possible. Anyway, so we taught ourselves the ropes. We got through it. Then we decided, right, I think we're ready to play a pub now. So we went back to the rehearsal studio, learned a whole new set of music, something, more grunty and rocky, and got a gig at the Harbour Lights Hotel in Tauranga, which was the place for, bands to play at the time. And we played our first pub gig. And I remember playing in there, and that's right. One of the songs that the guys decided to play in the pub set was a song, and it had harmonica in it. I said, "Oh, we can't play that. It's got harmonica in it." And then I thought, doesn't sound too difficult. I might see if I can learn it. So I went to the music shop, and I told the guy in the music shop that I wanted to play this song. What sort of harmonica do I need? And he said, right, the song is in the key of A, so you would be needing a D harmonica. So he instantly taught me the little trick that you need.
Works. Yeah.
Yeah. And he sold me a harmonica to suit this particular song. And I went home, I took the harmonica out of the box, and I played it.
And that was that?
That was it. I played it by instinct.
Right.
I sucked pretty bad.
Right.
But I could still play it.
And you turned out pretty good. I remember as a kid, me sneaking into pubs and watching a band that you know very well called Hard to Handle with John Michaels, Tippy Elkington, Spotty playing drums, and Kevin Coleman was playing bass at the time, who's just an incredible bass player. And I remember seeing them, and same sort of buzz as you, like I was in Scotty's though, same feet sticking to the ground, smoke everywhere, and just walking in there, just going and watching Tippy play the guitar, like he would just strangle the hell out of that neck. And for the listeners, this guy looked very, very similar to Stevie Ray. He's a Māori, which is our Indigenous folk from New Zealand. And he could sing, and he's just incredible. But then there'd be Graham. You would just walk along every now and then, like pop in, and you'd open, and you would have like 4 or 5 harmonicas on you, and you would jump up and you would just slay it. And I remember that as I used to sneak into the pubs when I was like 15, 16, because I looked a little bit older, and that I remember just seeing those performances, and they were just amazing. Like that era of Scotty's, where it used to be packed all the time. So there was the Hip Shooters. Hard to Handle, then Hip Shooters after that, but that era was pretty incredible for local music in Tauranga.
Oh, absolutely.
But yeah, your harmonica skills definitely picked up. So then you're playing with Bino. You've played your first gig outside of the cabaret scene, and things just start to pick up. You get more popular. You get more gigs. That's sort of how it went on.
Yeah, Tauranga had some pretty good musicians, and but I noticed that every time a band formed and had a short lifespan and it would fall apart, another one would form, but it was the same pool of musicians, the same gene pool, and they would just reconfigure
and play the same songs.
and play the same songs, and I didn't want to do that. So I went out looking for new young players who had, some new genes in the gene pool, Mm-hmm. And so I went out and headhunted a whole bunch of young up-and-coming players who I thought had potential, and recruited them. Now, I've never had a very mainstream musical taste. I've always liked rather unusual artists. And so instead of playing the same old songs that all the other bands played, my choice of songs was a lot broader, or a lot more varied. So not only did I have a whole bunch of young, new, inspiring players, but we were also playing a lot of songs that nobody had ever heard before.
Right.
The songs were all cover songs, but they were all tried and tested, of course, by the original bands. They were all good songs. They just weren't the ones that have been played on the radio. And so I became quite well known for having bands that were a little bit different, but still people really liked them.
Of course. And this particular band here that they're talking about now, is that, I'm assuming, is that Electric Soup?
Yeah, Electric Soup.
So I went to school with a lot of those guys, and you're absolutely right. They were young, upcoming guys, heaps of energy, but in their own essence, like Terry Vahalamas, for example, was just a genius. You know, like some of the
He is a
guitar
musical
work.
freak, musical genius. Yeah.
Yeah. But then same with Milty. He was just such a solid bass player. And then Roger Smith, I mean, he's still one of my favorite drummers from home. You know, he's like a metronome.
Yeah.
I was never in a band with Roger, but jammed with him loads of occasions. And you never, as a bass player, I never had to turn around and know where he's going to hit. It was just like,
He was always there.
just so amazing to play with.
It was such a great band, and yes, I chose really well because those musicians were. I still look back at that band and go, "Wow, that was fantastic."
Yeah, and I do remember also when Electric Soup sort of first came out, like you said, you know, that you're playing a lot of repertoire that people hadn't heard. It wasn't necessarily the artists that we hadn't heard. It was just like B-side versions of particular artists that we knew of.
Yeah.
And it was sort of like songs that we had forgotten that we knew that were awesome.
Yeah.
Which made the difference, right?
Yes. It was just, I look back at it now and I think that it's intelligent music choice for a cover band, you know, rather than just going with what everybody else plays or what everybody knows. You know, you can have a bunch of trained monkeys can play songs by the Beatles and they'll, you know, everyone will love them just because they're songs by the Beatles.
Right.
You know, then they were getting popular for the wrong reason, I thought. So I thought
the downside of that as playing at the downside of that though is playing as a musician, if you play in like, I remember when I was playing there was 4 or 5 cover bands in Tauranga. Pretty much everyone had the same set list. So as far as like the punters were concerned, or the people that came on to watch, there was no engagement because they hear the same songs every single weekend, right?
Yeah.
And then it gets a little bit like tiring to play to an audience where they've got their backs turned to you the whole time and that sort of thing. And it gets frustrating. And I think that's why a lot of the bands, like you said, sort of only have a short lifespan and they sort of crumble and then other people join and same stuff again.
Yeah, exactly. Completely agree with that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
I make sure when I'm playing that the audience don't take their eyes off me because they don't know what's going to happen next.
Right, and I think that's one thing that you've been very, very charismatic since I've ever known you playing. You're very good at grabbing a crowd by the balls and like, oi, no, I'm playing, you listen to us, sort of thing, you know?
Yes, yeah.
And there's a fine line of doing that because that can come across as arrogance and people like, well, F you, man. Or they're like, whoa, who are these cats? Like, these are really good. Yeah. And this is one thing I used to love about, and we'll get to Brilleaux in a minute, but Brilleaux, when you first started out with your live show and like used to come on stage through a fridge, things like that. So for everyone listening, Brilleaux used to have the stage was set like a living room. So there was like a lamp and there was a chair and there was a fridge and the boys used to come through this fridge. So you'd be looking at the stage, the fridge door open and the band would enter through that. So it was like visually...
Smoke would pour out of the fridge had a light inside. And
it was just the visual thing as well. So it wasn't just a band playing music. It was actually like a show, which I think was a lot different. So Electric Soup, that sort of came to an end. And then you had a bit of time off, I think, right before the next project?
Yes. Well, after playing in covers bands for so many years, I decided I'd had enough. Right. You know, I played covers. I just had enough of it. I was making lots of money actually in various bands, whether it was as like a cabaret act where you just put any figure that you want on it, and they either take it or they don't, you know. And then I also had bands which played what kind of music that I wanted to play, my choice of covers. So I had 2 kinds of cover bands. But yeah, I'd had enough of doing it. So I stopped playing. And then somebody wrote in the local newspaper, a local musician, wrote an article, and he was not so much criticizing the local bands, the local covers bands, but he was trying to inspire them. He was criticizing them for not writing and playing original material, when he thought, and we all knew clearly that they were competent enough musicians and clever enough. They were just being lazy and just playing covers,
right?
Just strictly for the money. And a lot of local musicians actually really took that to heart and weren't very happy with it. But I saw it from another perspective, and I thought, actually, I agree. I've been lazy. I've never tried to write original material, so I took that as a kick up the arse,
right?
Which inspired me to start a new band playing original material. I'd never done it before. I dabbled, but so I formed Brilleaux. This was in 1999.
Wow, that long ago.
Yeah, and
just before we move on to that, songs. Graham, can you just explain where Brilleaux came from? The name?
Brilleaux, right. Lee Brilleaux, it was the lead singer and harmonica player for a band called Dr. Feelgood.
Right.
Lee Brilleaux, he passed away, and Dr. Feelgood were not particularly well known in the Southern Hemisphere, but I knew of them. They were my favorite band at the time.
Right.
And as kind of a private hat tip to the band and to Lee, that's why I called the band Brilleaux. Right. I thought it was kind of a secret. It was a cool name, cool word. I didn't think anybody would know who Lee Brilleaux was. So it was my own secret little tribute to this man.
Now, you actually met Lee Brilleaux, didn't you? And you jammed with him.
I did. I had one of my earlier bands. We played a whole bunch of songs by Dr. Feelgood.
Right.
Again, it was this kind of music that wasn't popular in our country, but you'd have to be dead not to actually tap your feet to this kind of music. It's that infectious.
Yeah.
So I chose to play that music to a local crowd. So we played a whole bunch of these songs. Then Dr. Feelgood toured New Zealand in late 1980s, and I went along to see them. And I was watching the support band, and I saw the bass player standing in the crowd watching. So I introduced myself to him, and he said, "Would you like to come backstage and meet the band?"
Right.
Wow. So I was a huge fan of Dr. Feelgood. So anyway, he took me backstage, and Lee Brilleaux was sitting down in a chair with a suit on, smoking a fag, drinking a cocktail, and doing the crossword. That was what he used to do.
Real rock and roll.
Yeah. And so the bass player, Phil Mitchell, he introduced me to Lee. And I told him that I had a band, and we played a whole bunch of their songs off of their latest album. And their latest album had featured their new guitar player at the time, Gordon Russell. So he was quite surprised that a band on the other side of the world were playing songs off of his latest album.
That is so cool.
And he saw that I was a fan. Anyway, I went out, I said, "Thank you very much, for seeing me." And I got their autographs and stuff like that. And I went out and I was dancing all night, right up the front. And after the band finished their last song, I was walking off the dance floor and somebody tapped me on the shoulder. And I turned around and it was Lee Brilleaux. And he was standing behind me and he said, he had a harmonica in his hand. He said, "You can play this, can't you? Would you like to do the encore with us?"
Oh, you serious?
Yeah. So not only had he gone off stage and then he had came back round onto the dance floor and followed me and tapped me on the shoulder.
Right.
And he got me up and I did a song with him.
How did you know? How did he know that you played harmonica? Did you mention that to him backstage?
Yes, I told him that we
okay.
played. Yeah.
Now, isn't that
And
interesting?
a week later, there was a follow-on from that. A week later, they were playing in Hamilton, which was about 150 kilometres away from my town. And I didn't want to. I went to that gig as well because I'd had such a great time. But I didn't want to let them think that I was a stalker or something. So I was back about 10 rows in the crowd, just enjoying the show.
Right.
And they got to the end, and then Lee Brilleaux said, "Ladies and gentlemen, we've got a special guest artist going to join us for a couple of songs." And he pointed out into the crowd. And of course, we all turned around to see who he was looking at. And he said, "No, you, come up here."
It was you.
And he was he had seen me in the crowd, and he called me so that all the crowd parted like Moses in the Red Sea. And I walked through and climbed up the front of the stage, and I did 2 songs with them.
Wow. Now, isn't that interesting? Because, a lot of people say you should never meet your heroes because a lot of people are disappointed, or maybe the person's having an off night. We can't always be on, right? If he'd been a real prick, and that might have changed everything for you. Do you know what I mean? Like, maybe Brilleaux wouldn't have had the name Brilleaux now. Maybe you would have just gone like, "Oh my God, this music sucks," or what have you. But like that one moment, that one piece of human connection changed everything for you, right?
Well, it's had that one moment where I saw that bass player standing in the crowd and I introduced myself to him. That moment has had huge repercussions through my life, right up until today. Several years later, after Lee Brilleaux had died, I'd kept in touch with Phil Mitchell, the bass player, and I contacted Phil and said that I would like to come to Lee's memorial concert. And he said, "Yeah, that's a great idea. It's a long way to come. Why don't you come and stay at my house?"
Oh, wow.
Yeah, with my wife and I.
Yeah.
So he said, "I'll pick you up from the airport."
Oh, my God.
Yeah. So I said, "Yep." So I went to England, went to the concert. He picked me up. He picked me up from the airport, stayed at his house. He took me to the concert. And then Dr. Feelgood were touring that following week. So he said, "Well, why don't you come with us?"
Right.
So I jumped in the tour van with the band.
Right.
And went off touring. I only did 3 gigs with them. But I went to 3 gigs in the band van.
Yeah.
And I helped them. I sold the merch for them, and I helped them lug the gear in and set the gear up and saw the shows. So there was that. And then at the memorial concert, I met a couple of locals, and through them, I was able to organise Brilleaux's first UK tour.
Right, and that was the manager. His name
Rob.
escapes me. Rob, yeah, right,
Rob
okay,
Burnham, yeah,
right. And
He's
because of
our
that
UK
connection,
tour
you've done
manager.
4 tours over there now, right?
Yeah.
So let's move forward from like when you meeting Lee Brilleaux and all that. You've got Bino on board. You've started Brilleaux. You've started this new original music, which is different. And in all this time, in 22 years, you only had one person from the band change, and that was fairly early on into
After the first 18 months.
And I think it's because he moved to did Kevin move to
He
Australia?
got a job offer in Australia that he couldn't refuse.
Right.
And
Now, I played in a band with Kevin. He's an incredible guitarist. Like, he's crazy good.
yes, he was such the perfect fit for what I did when I wanted to start Brilleaux. What I did, I got a bunch of songs by Dr. Feelgood, 9 Below Zero, the Yardbirds, these strange kind of music who none of these young guys had ever heard before. And I gave them a cassette tape, I think it was, of these songs and said, "This is the band, the kind of music that I want to play. I don't want to play these songs. I want to play this kind of music. Listen to them. We'll learn them. so that we can play them and get in the groove of this style of music. And then we're going to write original stuff. So I gave them these tapes, and then I contacted them and said, are you keen to play this? You keen to do it? And all three of them, the bass player, Bino, and the guitarist, all said, yeah, we love it. They'd never heard it before. It was completely different to what they had heard. But they all agreed. They all learnt the songs. We went to the practice room and played them. Then the next week, this guitar player that you were talking about, Kevin Nankerville, he was so into it that he went out and he sold all his band gear.
Right.
He was a Strat player, and he had
he had a PV 5150 rig. It was a monster.
Yeah. He went up, sold all that, and he purchased a Telecaster and a Marshall stack.
Right.
A Jubilee Marshall stack, which was a Jubilee issue, which was a grey one. Because this was the style, these were the instruments and the amplifier that those bands were playing that he had heard on the tape. So he bought the right equipment to try and sound like that.
Right.
And he plugged it in the practice room, and he went, ka-ching, and every hair on my body stood on end.
Yeah.
He nailed it. That's how dedicated he was to playing this new style of music.
Right. Yeah, he's an incredible guitarist. And however, obviously it was sad that he left, but
Yes.
who you got to replace him is just as incredible in his own right, Brucey?
Oh, irreplaceable, of course.
Yeah. And again,
Bruce
such
Boland's,
a good dude, just such a good guy.
Yeah. Lives and breathes music.
Yeah.
I couldn't have got somebody better.
Mm.
And anyway, so Bruce has been the guitar player ever since. Since 1999. And
so through the years, you've done 9 albums. All of those albums has been all original, your own work.
We have one album of covers,
right?
Which are those traditional British rhythm and blues classics, and we have one album of unplugged material.
Right. Okay.
That material is a mixture of our own stuff, and it was a concept album, really. It was as an illustration to our fans of the music that inspired me to form Brilleaux.
Okay.
And play this kind of music. These were the bands that inspired my musical taste, which influenced what Brilleaux sounds like today.
So almost a homage album.
Yeah.
Now, where did you do all your recording? Did you use the same studio?
No, we've used 3 studios, 2 of them in Tauranga and one in Hamilton.
Okay.
Our first album was recorded at the Boat Shed in Tauranga, and that was pretty much recorded live.
Right.
And I think there was the overdub, the backing vocals were overdubbed because Bino, the drummer, sings BVs. So he recorded his drums and then overdubbed backing vocals. And our second album was recorded in that same studio. Our third album was recorded in Hamilton, and it was our first studio album where we overdubbed and had sampled sounds and music. We had backing singers. We had everything, that bell and whistle that you can throw at it.
Right.
And then all the other albums were recorded at Colourfield Studio in Welcome Bay.
Okay.
Which is a fantastic studio, great engineer. He's a great musician. He plays keyboards on a number of our tracks.
Is that Gavin by any chance?
No, it's not Gavin. He's another musical freak.
Oh, he's crazy, mate.
In a good way.
Yeah, for sure. He's nuts. Yeah.
No, this is Tim Julian.
Okay.
Colourfield Studio. He's a fantastic keyboard player and great engineer. We get him to play live with us whenever we get the opportunity.
Now, do you have a favorite album? Which is your go-to personally?
No, I don't. They're all very special. Some of them in particular, our first studio album, which is called 8-Track Style, which is, I suppose that was our first studio album. It's got some incredible moments on it with some female backing singers, horns, keyboards, and it was their first foray into overdubbing and stuff like that. Right. So there's that, and then our last album was called Brill Cream,
right? The
cream of Brilleaux,
yeah.
And it's pretty much a greatest hits,
right?
So it's some 3 new tracks on it, and a whole bunch of tracks taken off of the other albums or remastered or remixed. A couple of live tracks that were recorded at live shows off the desk, which turned out amazingly well that we could add to this kind of cream of Brilleaux album. So that's good. Decade was an album which has got some of my favourite songs on it, the songs that I'm most proud of writing,
right?
I should say.
Bit like your children sort of thing, right? When you've got some songs like that. And
it is, yeah. And then Pictures of the Queen is a special album as well. We wrote because we were touring the UK, we thought we'd write a bunch of songs that the English people would definitely be able to understand.
Right.
So we wrote them on with English topics.
And that's a great segue, actually, because moving into your touring to the UK,
yes.
I think you guys were a little bit surprised at the popularity that you sort of, the little groundswell that you grew very rapidly on the first tour, and the second, third, and fourth were, and I think it was the fourth tour that you met some of your musical heroes. And I remember seeing photos of you with them, and you looked like a little kid, mate. Like I can't believe this is happening, and like
absolutely,
yeah.
I couldn't sing.
Right.
And I was at a couple of moments. I was going, I don't believe this is really happening. Yeah. I'm on stage with, Steve Wellwyn or Dave Bucket,
right?
Dave Colwell. Here's me, just a guy from New Zealand playing music because I enjoy it, and suddenly I find myself on a stage on the other side of the world with some world-renowned musicians,
right,
having fun playing with us. That's bizarre feeling.
And then to make things even better, you came home to New Zealand and organised a tour, and they came out to New Zealand, and then you toured with them.
Oh, it's actually the other way around. We toured with them in New Zealand.
Oh, and then you went out.
And then we went to the UK, and they said, you come... Oh, whereabouts are you going? Can I come and play with you?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So to actually ask if they could be seen on stage with us, that's such a buzz. Dave Colwell, he's guitar player for Bad Company and Humble Pie. Mm-hmm. Dave took over guitar duties from Mick Ralphs, the original guitarist from Bad Company. And in fact, not only is Dave Bucket an amazing guitarist, but he actually looks like Mick Ralphs as well. So you can, when you're watching Paul Rodgers and Bad Company on a video, it'll quite often be Dave Bucket that you see, not Mick Ralphs.
Okay.
Or, I was fooled a few times, actually, thinking that I was watching Mick when it was actually Bucket. So we got to play with him. And Steve Wellwyn, who is the current guitar player with Dr. Feelgood, he used to play in a band with Steve Marriott.
Okay.
Who who was in Humble Pie also. But yeah, he was the guitarist for Steve Marriott and with Steve Marriott. Just love his guitar playing. Yeah.
And here we are, 2020. What's happening with Brilleaux right now? Obviously, New Zealand's done so well with what's happening. Have you guys got anything planned for 2020? Are you recording again soon? What's coming up for Brilleaux?
Well, I've continued writing songs. I've got a whole bunch of new tunes. I'm just hanging out to get together with the boys again because we haven't been allowed. Yeah. And on top of that, we have a fair bit of distance between us now.
Yep. 6 hours, is it?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. I've moved away from that town where I formed Brilleaux. And so now, yeah, it's a bit more of a special occasion when we get together, but we need to do that and get stuck into some of this new material. Mm-hmm. Because we've toured the UK a number of times, we would love to do it again, and it would be the easy option. We've got offers to play at festivals, the Isle of Wight Festival.
That's a great festival, by the way.
The Cambridge Rock Festival, again, plus a number of other places that we actually played before. But I'm hanging out to play in Australia.
Right.
For one, it's closer. Two, it's warmer. And three, I know the Aussies will just love this kick-ass style of blues that we play. There's some great Australian bands.
There's some amazing Australian bands.
I think that we actually, fit in the genre of a lot of those sort of niche alternative Australian bands. And we would fit right in there. I know the Australian crowd will really love us. It's just a matter of trying to get your foot in the door. Yep. Really is difficult, it's really is who you know, not what you know.
Yep. So if you've got any advice for someone that's just starting to learn an instrument and has got the bug, they know they're hooked, they want to do this, whether it be full-time or a passion project, what are two key things you could sort of suggest to someone that's starting out, or maybe 4 years into playing?
To me, I had to laugh at your early introduction to me where you said that I'm a good guitar player and a better harmonica player, but you said I was a good guitar player. Well, I'm the most shit guitar player that's ever been on a stage.
But that wouldn't work in an intro though, Graham. I couldn't go, he's a shit guitar player and he's a pretty average, do you know what I mean?
No, that's true. It wouldn't have sort of built me up very well, but I don't think musical virtuosity is the be-all and end-all of being successful in music. I am a dodgy singer. I'm an okay harmonica player. There are some fantastic, I can point you towards some great harmonica players. I can play the harmonica okay, and people like it, what I do, but there are many 100 times more competent than I am. And no, I'm a shit guitar player, but I write the songs and I'm playing my guitar because I like it. And because I want to.
You're very humble, mate. You're very, very humble. You're a great rhythm guitarist. I don't care what you say. And you're an absolute beast harmonica player. So you're very, very humble.
Well, thank you. So what I'm trying to say is that you don't have to be the best, but music's got to come from here. If you're going to be convincing and make other people enjoy your music, your performance and your music has to come from here. It's no good just coming from here. Right. I'm bored shitless watching these virtuoso guitar players it doesn't do anything for me because there's no magic, no spark, no emotion. So I've got to feel the music, and I've got to, you were talking about Tippy, the guitar player from Hard to Handle.
Yeah.
He would thrash and beat and belt and strum, not to mention pick as well, the guitar. He would put it behind his head and he would do any number of things to this guitar to wrench a sound and a tone out of it.
Right.
Now, for one, you couldn't take your eyes off of him because you wanted to see how and what he was doing. And also he had enough skill. You've got to have some skill. You can't be absolutely bereft of any kind of talent or technique. But he also had enough skill to know how and where to put his fingers on the fretboard to wrench out some kind of sound. What I'm saying is it's as much performance as it is musical virtuosity.
Right.
That's my biggest thing. I have made a career on making people believe I'm far better than I am. I've convinced people. I said to myself very early on, I remember at my first big gig, it was on a big outdoor stage, and it was in my very first band, and I was scared to death. And I said to myself, if I go out there on this stage and look like I'm scared, they're all going to know I'm scared, and they're going to pick up on that. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to go out there and look really confident and make them think I know what I'm doing. And so I did. And I went out there and I sold it. I sold them what I was doing. I told them I was good and that they should listen to me. I wasn't. I was shit. But no, this is my first gig.
Right.
Honestly, I couldn't have been good. But I sold it to them. And I came off stage feeling elated because I had sold it to them. I could tell I had sold it to them. So that became my secret weapon ever after that. You've got to make it look like you know what you're doing, look like you're confident, look the crowd in the eye and connect with somebody. Those are the tricks that I've learned.
That's exactly it, the human connection. That's why it's so important,
If you look down at your shoes or you turn to face the back or you don't make a connection, they won't get it. But if you look somebody in the eye, connect with somebody or connect with somebody's shoes in the back row or something, it doesn't matter. You make that connection. Those are my tips.
That's awesome. Well, there you go. This is what makes Graham Clark. This is what makes Brilleaux. I would suggest everyone go check them out. You can find them on Facebook under the Fabulous Most Groovy Brilleaux. Brilleaux is spelled Brilleaux. I'll put the links down below as well so you can find them out. Please go check them out. I'll also put their email address in the links as well. So if you want to find out any information, if you want to buy some records or anything like that, feel free to reach out to them. As you can see, Graham's a really approachable guy. He loves his music. Mate, I just want to thank you so much for being a part of TommoTalks. It's been awesome to have you on board. And I looked up to catching and having a cold one with you before we hit our next decade.
Yeah. Well, now I know where you are. It's even better excuse to come and catch up with you because I've never been to Canada before.
Well, there you go. We'll wait till it's winter, mate, and it's -40. We'll get you over and show you
No.
All right, mate. Yeah. Listen, thank you so much for your time. I do appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Once again, this was Graham Clark from Brilleaux. Check them out on the Fabulous Most Groovy Brilleaux Facebook page. The link will be in the description. And look out for the next TommoTalks episode coming out in a week. Cheers.